Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Andrew Jeffries. I'm the director of the Southeast Asia Energy Division here at the Asian Development Bank, and I'm the moderator for this session 2.2, Solar Energy. It's not just electricity. Solar photovoltaics, for good reason, has become perhaps the world's most important source of renewable energy. Its ability for large utility scale applications, along with distributed generation applications to building or household level rooftop solar power, make it versatile. And its incredible cost reduction over the past decade is transforming the power sector. That said, this session is about other applications of solar energy, which includes solar thermal applications, emergency water supply and desalination, agricultural applications, heat and steam operations, and applications of solar PV generation for focused activities such as remote microgrids. So it's my honor to introduce to you 3 expert speakers and 2 expert panelists to talk about some of these applications. We will listen to a presentation on solar applications to support agriculture via group irrigation, a second on solar organic Rankine cycle technology for electricity generation, heat and cooling, and a third that discusses an integrated approach to access to electricity. One of our panelists is an expert on community resilience and solar battery microgrids with extensive experience in the Caribbean islands and in Africa. And our second panelist is a researcher with broad, extensive consulting experience in renewable energy, natural resource management, climate change, and other fields. So I'll start by introducing our 3 speakers in the order that they'll speak, and our 2 panelists. But I'll wait and I'll present their bios before each of them speak. So our 3 speakers are Mr. Anshuman Lath. He's the director of Gram Urja Solutions Private Limited. Dr. Suresh Baral, assistant professor, School of Engineering, Pokhara University in Nepal. Ms. Pamli Dekka, associate director, energy program of the World Resources Institute, India. And our 2 expert panelists are Mr. Roy Torbert. He's a principal at the Rocky Mountain Institute in the United States, and Dr. Roman Vakulchuk, senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. So before each speaker begins, I'll share their bio, and then they'll have the floor for a target time frame of around 10 minutes, and then I'll proceed to the next speaker. So, and then to the second and the third. And then after that, I'll introduce the 2 panelists, and they'll share their bios at that time and let them introduce themselves and share some thoughts and experiences relevant to this session's topic. And then the rest of the session is open for discussion and for questions and answers. So at that time, if anyone who has a question, please click on the Q&A button at the top of your screen, and please include your name and your organization. Please note that depending on the number of questions, we may not be able to accommodate them all. So, we'll do the best we can and make sure this is kind of a lively discussion. So to start things off, let me introduce our first speaker. Mr. Anshuman Lath is the co-founder of Gram Urja Solutions Private Limited. Gram Urja works with remote communities fulfilling their electricity, water, and cooking fuel needs using community-scale renewable energy solutions. Gram Urja has installed over 280 community-scale projects impacting over 75,000 people in remote regions. So his presentation is on group irrigation in remote communities, solar-enabled community-scale agriculture. So Mr. Lath, I turn it over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We are a company called Gram Urja, which means rural energy, and we've been working in energy access projects over the last 12 years now. So I'm going to speak about group irrigation today. Uh, so Gram Urja has been working with remote communities and have worked across the tribal remote belt of India. We've mostly known for microgrids, where we've installed close to 70 already and are going to be installing another 8 as we speak now. But we've also done a lot of solar pumping, both for domestic water and for irrigation, and electrified around 55 institutions, including schools, primary health centers, hostels, and other infrastructure. Recently, we've also done some work with biogas-based projects, which means community biogas solutions. So I'm going to speak about irrigation today. These slides give you an idea of the kind of terrain that we are talking about. So you can see the remoteness and the kind of communities that are involved. Almost all of these villages are small hamlets of 45 to 50 households, or maybe sometimes 70, 80, and difficult to reach. So the one on the right here that you see is a primary health center in Nandurbar, where you can see, it's like very, very hilly terrain, and therefore there are some aspects of the communities there that we have to take into account when we work in these communities. So the one here is also a pumping solution that is implemented in one of these villages. Gram Urja has, over the period of time, come to understand what we call as the circle of success. The circle of success essentially is is a combination of factors that we need to take into account to make any project long-lasting or sustainable. Primary among that we found is the community interaction, where we try and understand the communities and try and get their buy-in for these projects. Designing for aspirations, so that people know what they're getting into and they also have a say in what they're getting into. Metering for every user, which ensures sustainability and discipline. We also have the a tariff structure, so that each consumer therefore pays for what they use, and then an ownership transfer, which makes it sustainable for a longer period. The reason that this model has come about is that we started feeling that if one of these fail, the projects might have a bottom end where we can just start going downhill. So the accomplishments that we have out of all of this is that now every project of ours has a local governing body set up for the villages by the villagers, and over 90% of these projects are operational as we speak. So out of the 69 microgrids, we recently did a survey and we found that 5 of them were not working, and 1 of them was for a technical reason which we are setting right, and 4 for some social reasons. So that's a close to 92, 93% success rate, and similar for pumps. And some of the earliest microgrids and pumping systems are over 8 years old. And in these remote communities, to be able to maintain these over an 8-year, 10-year, 20-year period is an accomplishment in our sense. An independent assessment by third-party evaluators, and I would like to introduce here Aparna Katre, who's also in the audience today, but is a co-author of this whole presentation today. She's a faculty member at the University of Minnesota Duluth and has been researching energy access projects and trying to understand the impact. So such kind of evaluations have shown high degree of customer satisfaction, technical, economic, and institutional sustainability for such projects. So there are 2 primary clusters, one in the eastern part of India where we have around 30 odd pumps, and another around 100 odd pumps in the western side where we've been working in India. The challenges essentially are that most of these farmers used to grow one single crop during the monsoons or the rainy period, which is 3 or 4 months, and this would be a food crop like rice in most cases. And the remoteness makes it difficult for them to get diesel, because sometimes even if diesel is available in a pump close by, the ability to get it to their plant is not so easy, because you can't go with a can into a bus and certain things like that. The grid is available in many of these villages, but the grid is available only at the village level. But the moment you want to move out into the farms or where the water source could be, then there is the ability of the grid to be extended there is a very, very big problem. So these are mostly inaccessible villages. Some of our villages are not accessible for 3 to 4 months in the rains because of the terrain. So the community interaction, which is the core of all our work, is the most important aspect, where not only do the people buy in, but they start understanding what they are getting into, and they have a say in designing it, in deciding the land, in deciding the crop, deciding the tariff and everything. So this is where we work with local social organizations who are probably working in health, education, or people working with women empowerment, agriculture, and then we try and see how energy could be an enabler for them to start improving the lives of the farmers. The second is the designing for aspiration. Some of the things that we have to understand here is the source of water. We try and make sure that the source is always surface water, so that there is no depletion of groundwater. Till now, that is what we've been following. Trying to see if the irrigation is going to be drip or flooded. Trying to see the number of farmers in each group. Trying to see the distance and height of the farmland, and the pipe length, and the what could be the crop that they will cultivate. So the answers that emerge are therefore an evolved solution where there is an involvement of the community itself, and not a piecemeal solution that is thrown all across the fields, just saying that one size fits all. The next is the tariff structure, which is again mutually designed, mutually agreed to by the farmer groups. And the whole idea till now has been to ensure operations and maintenance over a long period using this kind of a tariff structure for what they pay. So the costing mechanisms are again evolved ground up, and we've seen all of these kinds of costing mechanisms. So we have examples for each one of this. A day-based charge as to what a farmer would pay for half a day for the pump or a full day. A monthly fixed charge in some cases. An initial contribution plus a monthly charge. So there are 3-4 villages like that. And then there are income-based charges where in one case we've seen that the farmer group has agreed to pay 10% of their income generated for the pumping system. So these are all evolving. The whole idea, as we said earlier, is to first establish that there is an ability to pay, and also establish that these are systems that groups of farmers in these remote places can use and benefit from. The last part, as we spoke earlier, is the ownership transfer, where the final system is then transferred back to the farmers, to the community, so that they can take care of this over the next 20-25 years, as the case may be. So this one village that I would like to speak about, Tulya Chapada, is a village which is, you've seen some pictures earlier, is a very remote village. And in this, they have now moved to 55 acres of irrigation this year. All 108 farmers are more or less involved. 99 of them have started, cropping using this system. And even in the lockdown, they were able to sell their groundnut at a reasonable price. So $300 to $400 per farmer is what we are hearing is the benefit that has accrued to them from the second crop, reducing their migration or the intensity to look for work outside in the cities. This is now progressing every year. This is again the same picture. You can see that this village is not so accessible otherwise, and maybe 1 or 2 farmers would have been doing some irrigation with diesel earlier. Access. This Valaipada is one very big success for a farmer, where he was able to gain something like a $1,500, just from the sale of chilies, because he got a very good price for his chilies that time. There was a spike, and he came up with chilies at the right time, that period. So now many more farmers are trying to do the same in that whole belt. And this is also a challenge because sometimes the pricing goes down because of all this. And similarly, so you're seeing watermelon, cucumber, pumpkin in some areas, bitter gourd, okra, cucumber in some areas. So there are a variety of crops that these farmers are growing in their own areas. So the last 2 slides, I'd just like to talk about the long-term sustainability. What are we seeing? What we are seeing here is, can people reduce poverty and malnutrition? Yes, because some of the farmland also gets into vegetables for their own, or their own consumption, including, resulting in some amount of, nutrients and vitamins getting into the families. Secondly, we're seeing a lot of women involvement in the farming and in the sale of produce already in these areas. So these are 2 or 3 things, I think, also helping in food security. And we're seeing that cash crops are more viable. So as Aparna Katre was doing this research earlier, so she was trying to understand the sustainability of the microgrids, for example, which are also energy access projects, where we were seeing administrative governance and technical governance being very high for Gram Urja's projects, which are the green ones. And similarly for the community participation, very high level of leadership generation, management by the villagers themselves, organization. And this is also what we're trying to achieve with pumping, because what are the conclusions? I mean, the idea with this pumping is that these 500 odd farmers are showing that there is the concern on ability to pay is being addressed. So these are generating some surpluses that can come back to the system. So this is the first part. Now the second part would be to establish willingness to pay. The second part is this is something that can be done in scale. So the impact could be very, very large because you're talking to the last mile. You've seen the villages in all of these photographs. These are very, very remote villages. However, there are boundary conditions where we talk about surface water on which the community has rights. So the moment you go very deep and try to take out water from bore wells, the costs increase, and two, also probably not sustainable. Secondly, the ability to come together in groups. The more remote you go, the chances that people are willing to come together in groups is higher. And this is also something that we've been working on. And the readiness to work for a second or third crop. So as we progress, then the chances are to explore partnerships to then augment their incomes using better supply chains and local value addition. So the last picture is of a village where this is a Warli painting, and they have a village life depicted here with women in the farms, and all of a sudden you see solar panels and a pump and a small tank here and stand posts, which means that the village is now accepted the solar-based irrigation or solar-based water as part of their lives. So that's all for now. Thank you very much, and look forward to your questions.
Mute. Okay, hello. Sorry about that. I was unable to unmute. So thank you, Anshuman. Very interesting. When I was listening to your presentation, I was thinking about how maybe a decade or two ago, the issue with those kind of solutions was the technology. And now, maybe that's a little more proven and known, and this extensive community interaction and involvement and getting that right seems to be the challenge. So happy to talk more about that later. So let me introduce our next speaker. Dr. Suresh Baral is an assistant professor in the School of Engineering at Pokhara University in Nepal. He earned his doctorate in mechanical engineering at Pusan National University in South Korea. His teaching and research are in the areas of renewable energy and design of thermal systems. Recently, he has been engaged in projects on the solar ORC technology, funding by University Grants Commission and the PURC, Pokhara University. He also serves as a reviewer for several international journals and has dozens of peer-reviewed publications, and has given a number of presentations at national and international conferences, including this one. So his presentation, I'll turn it over to Dr. Baral, who will be talking about solar organic Rankine cycle technology for electricity generation, heating, and cooling, a new pathway for sustainable development. Thank you. Take it away, Dr. Baral.
Hi everyone, my name is Suresh Baral. I am assistant professor in the School of Engineering, Pokhara University, Nepal. Thanks for the opportunity for providing me the platform for presenting on the title Solar Organic Rankine Cycle Technology for Electricity Generation, Heating and Cooling, a new pathway for sustainable development in Himalayas and Tarai region of Nepal. Let's begin the introduction after having the clean energy sources. In Nepal, please stop. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's begin with the introduction. In Nepal, the clean energy is almost generated by hydropower plant. Almost all of the energy is occupied by the power generation of hydropower. It is estimated that the potential of hydropower plant is around 43,000 megawatt in Nepal. In 2020, the access to electricity was just only 19% of the total population. But in 2019, access to electricity is without electricity is just 6% of the population. So remaining 6% of the population has to be electrified. So most of the energy uh, in this energy sector. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. The let's begin with this presentation again. The energy consumption in Nepal is mostly by hydropower. So the people without electricity is 1.7 million, and the number of household is around 290,000 people still unaware. So it is due to so the people. Excuse me. Okay, I'm very sorry. I have to share his sharing his problem. This is the another scenario of Nepal where the primary energy consumption is as follows from 1990 to 2017. The most of the energy is used as biofuel or waste, and there are no solar or wind energy power generation with grid connection. But in some cases, the wind and solar has been used as off-grid conditions or in standalone condition. So this is the graph showing how the pattern rises from 1990 to 2017. And in this graph, in this picture, we can see the heating of rural household in Himalayan region. Most of the Himalayan region, they don't have heating system. The heating is done primarily by this heater, which is where the energy source is firewood, and another one is for improved cook stove. After fire cooking of meal, the heating proposed is used in Himalayan region in their houses. After boiling water, this with this system, they helps to improve the environmental condition of the houses, thereby heating technology. So this is a very primitive type of technology. In this case, there need to be done with new technology. So I propose a new technology which is solar organic ranking cycle. Due to this primitive type of heating technology, most of the people face some health problems such as difficulty in breathing and cough, tearing of eyes, and a skin problem, headache, and others. So these are the main health problems while they use this type of primitive heating technology. So in this context, a new technology should be introduced, which is known as organic ranking cycle technology. This technology uses a solar energy, and it uses a solar thermal sources, solar collector, and it is similar to that of traditional solar power plant, which uses water. But instead of water, there should be using an organic compound, which is known as R134A, or it might be several organic compounds. These compounds, when get evaporated by this heat source, then there is a generation of power. This power can be utilized for various activities in rural areas of developing countries as well as in Nepal. In the same unit, there is another heating and cooling unit in the same system. So this can be used for various purposes, such as in Himalayan region, their needs or heating activities in their household. So this can be converted later by adding systems for heating of the houses. But in Tarai region, where the climate is very hot in Nepal, it can be used as cooling unit. So this can be interchanged according to their needs. So these are the, in the graph it can be shown that there are various organic fluids which can be used in this system. And let's begin with another technical potential, theoretical potential, geographic potential, and technical potential for this ORC in various South Asian countries. It can be said that in Nepal there is a potential of around geographic potential of around 466 terawatt hour per year, with a technical potential of 37 terawatt hour per year. This can be estimated through the resource ability in the country, and then with the solar radiation falling on the surface, and the geographic potential, which includes the capacity for generating energy with some capacity factors such as the ORC efficiency have a very less efficiency as compared to photovoltaic or other system. It is assumed that the solar ORC could have around 10 to 12% of the total efficiency. Based on this efficiency, the technical potential of various countries has been estimated. And in this slide, we can see the India has highest percentage of technical potential, followed by Pakistan. So in South Asia, this could be one of the promising technology for utilizing uh, for electricity, heating and cooling purposes. Similarly, the economic analysis of the system has been estimated. It is seen that with a size of 3.5 kilowatt of this solar ORC technology, the cost would bring about 12,425. And it is said that during its life period, if we assume the life system period of this system to be 20 years, it has a minimum levelized cost of electricity to be $1.6 per kilowatt hour, and the payback period will be around 10 years. Similarly, if the generation is higher, the payback will be more lesser. But in order to be feasible, the levelized cost of electricity should be around $1.6 to $0.2 per kilowatt. So this will be appropriate as compared to other heating and cooling system instead of using gas or oil. So for this, the estimation of carbon dioxide should be calculated. With this system, this ORC system, it can save around 22.5 tons of carbon dioxide during its 20 years of lifetime. It is assumed that the obstacle of ORC development in Nepal, it is very difficult due to high initial cost, because the cost is around $13,000, and so it is very high as compared to the solar PV cell. And technological barrier, since the technology is not so mature, still it is in research and development phase. The small scale are just uh, in technology is not so mature as compared to big size plant. And another technology, another barrier or obstacle might be lack of human resources, since the human resources, there are not so much available on this ORC cycle technology. The know-how, knowledge are not known to everyone, so there is lack of human resources. And finally, since it is new technology, there is no any policy for implementation in the country. That's why these are the obstacle for technology development in Nepal in case of solar ORC. But I propose for financing mechanism for this ORC technology. It is based on three types. One is investment based, where the capital subsidy of ORC should be around 60 to 80% of investment. Another is connection based. If the household around 30 to 50 has been benefited, then they should pay around $300, and it is the subsidy rate of government. Finally, the output based system is that how much amount they can use. Based on that category, it should be paid or subsidized should be given for the local people and the remote areas. In this way, the solar ORC can be benefited for all remote areas people. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baral. Interesting, and some interesting challenges with the ORC. Okay, I'll be moving to our third speaker, Ms. Pamli Dekka, who is the Associate Director of the Energy Program at the World Resources Institute, India. So Pamli leads the energy access work at WRI India, where she works with governments, investors, technology providers, and development institutions to improve access to reliable, affordable, and sustainable sources of electricity. She started her career as an oil field engineer with Schlumberger and went on to consult for BCG and Shell. Prior to WRI India, she mentored clean energy enterprises in India, helping them scale up and seek investments, and also covered clean energy companies listed on the London Stock Exchange as an equity analyst. She's a chemical engineer from the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and holds an MBA from INSEAD. So her presentation is on an integrated approach to support energy access. So thank you, Ms. Dekka. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share our findings from the field. Let me quickly, since we have 10 minutes, let me very quickly go through a story. This is the story of a hospital in a remote location in a state of Jharkhand in India, which is on the eastern side of the country. So this hospital happens to be one of the most focal points for treating patients from almost 450 villages in the two most remotest and backward districts in India, that is Palamu and Latehar. As you can see in this photograph, there is a big diesel generator set that they are using for powering up their important loads. So if you go back a bit into the history of the hospital, for a longest time, they did not have electricity connection, right? And when they did have the connection, they were facing issues with power outages, almost 3 to 8 hours a day. And despite spending a huge amount of money on electricity bills and diesel for running the diesel generator set, they still were unable to provide the best of services. And we all know how it affects the healthcare sector if you don't have enough access to electricity. It's not just about the lights and fans, it's about several other things. And the COVID has actually brought these situations in front of us, how you need electricity for ventilators, you need electricity for running the anesthesia machines, or for running the basic diagnostic tests in a lab, right? So without electricity, you can't perform any of these. In addition to this, there is the safety concerns of the patients, of the staff which reside on the campus, because this is a residential facility. It's been very difficult for them to, in fact, attract and retain the staff, given the remoteness of the location and given the fact that there's severe heat conditions in the summers. It's very difficult to attract staff in these remote areas under these stressful working conditions. So they have been working like this for a long period of time. But in December 2019, a doctor who had been working out there for a long time felt the urgent need for supporting this hospital. They have been trying to get access to funds for a long time to look at renewable energy sources, particularly solar in this context, given there's good solar irradiation in this location. In December 2019, a doctor finally came ahead and offered them a small grant with which they could set up a 10 kilowatt peak system. Now let's fast forward, right? In March, this hospital ended up being on the front line of the pandemic. They were selected as the only hospital in that full area to actually cater to the COVID patients. So at that point of time, This is when the backup facility, which they had in terms of diesel, they did away with that. And instead they started focusing on the renewable energy source of 10 kilowatt peak to power the most critical loads in that period, which is the ICU beds, the ventilators, and some other critical needs which were required during the pandemic. So in the absence of this system, it would have been really very difficult for them to achieve this, which really proves the point that solar is not just about electricity, it's about all the other things which are required to power up these loads. Given this is a 10 kilowatt peak system, they still need to go and install another 70 kilowatt peak to actually power up all their loads. But we continue to work with them to help them reach there where they want to go finally. So with this story in mind, we kind of can quickly understand the importance of electricity in achieving all the SDGs, right? In fact, 75% of the SDG targets right now depend upon the availability of a reliable, affordable, and a sustainable source of energy for their achievement. So improved electricity access can actually finally catalyze socio-economic development, which you could see from Anshuman's slide and Dr. Burrell's slide as well. But given the fact that we have achieved quite a bit in terms of electrification at the household level. In fact, in the discussions yesterday, it was brought out that only 200 million people in the globe globally are now lacking access to electricity at the household level. But now if you quickly go to the institutional loads, right, be it the health sector or education sector, where we're talking beyond electricity, just lights and fans, the situation is much different. So this is a very simple illustration of what the situation is in the country of Assam. There are still a large number of states in the country which do not have their basic health centers electrified or connected to the grid. And that's a huge number, right? So if you kind of summarize this slide, there are less than 70% of the sub-centers in 12 states are fully electrified, right? Almost 39,000 health centers in the country are not yet connected to the grid. And these are the health centers which actually cater to the most remotest areas of the country, which are in the very locations which are very rural and very remote, sometimes far off, right? So despite the fact that we know that electricity is such a critical element for achieving the health outcomes, this is currently the situation in the country. There have been a lot of measures already been taken by the government, a lot of schemes and a lot of programs and policies which have been rolled out. But there's one thing which further needs to be focused on is there are 4 critical elements which need to come together to make this possible, to make the possibility of bringing technology to the ground, to make it, to scale it up. So let's see the 4 critical elements, right? If we look at from the top left, so there is technology at the center of it, technology which Mr. Anshuman has discussed, which Dr. Burrell has discussed. But to make this technology possible, you need financing. And depending upon the type of the health center, and I keep referring to the health center because we are talking about the health sector at this point of time. Depending upon the type of the health centers, the type of financing which is required, it's very different. The private health centers which work on a franchisee model or on a for-profit model will have a very different business model versus a government health center or a not-for-profit health center. Similarly, what needs to be taken into account is data. Is there enough data to do these assessments? And finally, all of this has to come together in the form of making policies which are actually reflecting the needs on the ground. Instead of following a completely top-down approach, there should also be a bottom-up approach where you take the inputs, just like Anshuman has referred in this slide. How do you engage with the community to get inputs from them to further help in the policy-making process, making programs and implementing and rolling them out? So there is a disconnect right now at this point of time, which is actually leading to a lot of failures in the programs and systems, which can be worked on by taking up this integrated approach. Now, if I see what kind of things are required, right? So if you look at data, so generally when we talk about data, the context we have is data on electricity access, but that's not just enough, right? We need data on the climate vulnerabilities in those communities where these systems are being set up in order to ensure that your energy infrastructure is resilient. You need data on the existing demand, but you also need data on how the facility is going to ramp up its services in the future. Similarly, you need data on what are the potential sources of funding. A lot of the times we have come across a situation where health professionals don't really know where to go in terms of finding the right set of vendors. So you need data on what are the vendors available in that area. You need data on the type of technology. The new technologies which are coming up, can we take them into consideration when we are designing these projects? But we need data, information on all of that. Next, let's move to finance, right? So just as I told, We need a proper mapping of the type of stakeholders in the financing world. So we need the kind of organizations which require the funding, and then we need to map it to the type of financing solutions which are available. And for that matter, we might need to redevise some of these solutions which can actually help some of these hospitals which are working in very remote areas. For example, the hospital that I referred to, they are a not-for-profit charity hospital. If you talk to them about installing an 85 kilowatt peak system, they don't have the finances for it. So what kind of a model can work in their case? Is it a grant-based model? Is it a grant plus debt-based model? It is some new form of innovative financing which can be taken into account for helping these kind of hospitals. And then you have to build the capacity within the organization to seek the funding. It's not just important to connect them to the right funding institution. It's also important to empower them to do that in the future. And finally, policy. So this is very important because at the state level, the context may be very different. And that needs to actually feed into the central level policy making process, which happens in a country like India. So the development of programs, which we have seen till now, for example, if you go to the health sector programs, they are developed in silos, and the energy sector programs are developed in silos. But the health and the energy department have to talk together to understand what are the challenges and how to resolve them in terms of even at the basic level of designing a program or a scheme. A basic immunization program that needs to be developed or has to be rolled out has to take into consideration that a lot of these ILRs, which are located in the health centers, are not really operating most efficiently because of the constant power outages. So how can you then put that element into your immunization program to ensure there is access to electricity, to ensure that there is continuous availability of power to maintain the temperatures which are required to keep these vaccines at the optimal conditions? So at the end of the day, it has to reach the end user, and they have to have the capacity to understand these different components, be it around data, be it around finance or policy, to be actually able to take any decision on the type of technology that they should be looking at for challenges. And this is what we have been trying to do in WRI. So we have actually tried to get data on the platform, which is the Energy Access Explorer platform, which is something which we're developing for East Africa and India. This is a quick snapshot of the work that we're trying to do. It's the state of Jharkhand. You can actually see the locations of the health centers and the quality of power for the health centers, which will enable the investor, the policymaker, or the government health department of the government to come out with specific recommendations on what kind of focus areas they should have, either in terms of funding availability or in terms of type of technology, or in terms of improving the resilience of the technology. So this is the kind of data approach that we have been taking. And in addition to that, just to summarize, all these components that I have spoken about is exactly what we are trying to do in our work with these remote health centers, where we are going beyond electricity and looking at solar as not as an option for electricity. So we are trying to bring together the different kind of stakeholders, which is the policymakers, the funding agencies, the think tanks working in these different states and at the central level, to come together to find some of these solutions to these problems. And at the same time, we are also trying to go on the ground to educate and build the capacity of the health sector partners to find solutions and to empower them to take decisions for improving the access to electricity, to support their services and to improve their services. So I will stop there. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Pamli, and a nice way to conclude the three presentations. You know, the last more than 3 months, the ADB has been working tirelessly on, COVID responses, health grants and assistance and stimulus packages and the like. And us in the energy area have felt a little left out. And so it was really nice to hear you talk about, how critical, it's the lowest, the most vulnerable that are the hardest hit by whether it's natural disasters or this COVID pandemic. And if you don't even have electricity, you don't even have a means to, to help. So that just, really hit home. Thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over now. I'm going to introduce the first of our 2 expert panelists, and I'll have him say a few words and then introduce the second. The first is Mr. Roy Torbert of the Rocky Mountain Institute. Roy is a principal on the Islands Energy Program, specializing in integrated energy planning, project cost analysis, and renewable and efficiency finance to expand and accelerate the transition to global clean energy economy. Roy manages the islands team, helping the governments and utilities of Caribbean islands reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, working extensively in Puerto Rico, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, among others. He's worked with leading universities and global multinationals to analyze net zero opportunities and to deliver roadmaps to reaching carbon reduction goals. Roy's research efforts include exploring ways to reduce the soft costs of solar energy, such as financing costs, and valuing all the benefits of highly efficient buildings and assisting on analysis for the Rocky Mountain Institute's Reinventing Fire initiative and book. So prior to RMI, Roy was a consultant with Booz Allen and Hamilton in Washington, D.C. So Roy, I'll turn it over to you to just say a few words and introduce your some relevant thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And it's great to be back at this event. We must thank ADB for their generous hosting of what is now a virtual event. It's a pleasure, I guess, to imagine being in the wonderful hallways and ballrooms surrounding that courtyard at ADB, even though we're all joining this virtually. So as Andy mentioned, I'm with Rocky Mountain Institute. We're an independent think and do tank, now with a presence in 7 global offices, including across the United States, in Beijing, and a presence in New Delhi. My team focuses mostly in the Caribbean and in sub-Saharan Africa, with a focus in Ethiopia and Nigeria. And I lead our work in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines, around energy efficiency. So I think the speakers thus far have really done a great job in pointing out, from irrigation to the health sector to remote villages, and the need for not only power but also heat, the potential of solar and how much more it can do. And certainly this is something I've seen in the last few years, and I'm excited to speak with you and all of our virtual attendees about. I think there's just a short story I might say of the communities we've worked with, myself and my team in Puerto Rico, which 2 years ago had a catastrophic hurricane, which at the start of 2020, even before COVID, experienced 2,500 earthquakes and aftershocks that were highly disruptive and deadly. And then with a relatively fragile health system and an elderly population are facing the threat of COVID. And similar to what Pamela was saying, the potential for resilient energy solutions to support communities is something we've seen firsthand, where schools that are so essential for all sorts of community function in disaster times are serving as shelters, and in COVID situations are the primary point for food distribution. And through some of our work, they've been able to have resilient power throughout this entire time. So that's one. We have lots of other experiences, including in what we call productive use of power. So irrigation that Anshuman talked about is of course critical. And what we see increasingly in places like Ethiopia is the higher value services of grain milling, bread baking, beer, etc., that is really productive for community development. So excited to speak on all those topics with you in this session.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Roy, and welcome back, virtually this time. Okay, our next expert panelist is Dr. Roman Vakulchuk. He's a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs in Oslo, Norway. He holds a PhD in economics from Jacobs University in Bremen in Germany. And his main geographical specialization is the emerging markets of Central Asia and Southeast Asia. And major research areas are renewable energy and natural resource management, climate change, investment climate, economic transition, trade, infrastructure and transport, and public sector reform. Dr. Vakulchuk has 10 years of project management experience and served as project leader and expert in research projects organized by inter alia, the Asian Development Bank, the Global Development Network, the German Development Cooperation, or GIZ, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, the Natural Resource Governance Institute, the OECD, the Research Council of Norway, and the World Bank. He's also previously worked at the oil company Shell in Germany. And in 2013, he was awarded the Gabriel Al-Salem International Award for Excellence in Consulting. So Dr. Vakulchuk, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for your kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of this meeting and also to have an opportunity to share a few lessons of what we at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs do in partnership with several institutions in Asia, including the ASEAN Center for Energy based in Indonesia. And we actually look at the policy and investment side of the solar energy deployment in Southeast Asia and Central Asia, two regions that have just recently started looking into the sort of the non-grid solutions related to solar energy. And well, needs and challenges in the two regions, on the one hand, they're quite similar, but on the other hand, they're also different. And there are particular places in Thailand, for example, Malaysia or Myanmar, with village communities that have limited or no access to the grid electricity. Similarly, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan also have some similar, areas with remote communities where actually access to grids and electricity is not of an issue, but it's more the issue of, because of the climate change, drought-related issues, water shortages becoming more important, and there definitely a huge need for, for technological solutions to meet some of those. And of course, there's an increasing evidence that, for example, solar pumps can be used and seen as one of the such solutions. And we also see that, some of the technological applications are already being used to mitigate some of the immediate issues. For example, last year, the Thai Ministry of Energy decided to deploy, solar-powered pumps to communities in the north of the country that were affected by severe droughts. So they installed more than 1,400 such installations. That was a very timely sort of measure to address it. And in terms of the some of the key policy lessons that we've learned from the two regions, I would just like to summarize. So they are basically four. First of all, still in both regions, markets are not really ready to scale up the application of other solar power solutions. And so the governments still remain as kind of the main player and the main factor in supporting and promoting these solutions and applications. But of course, private sector participation and community involvement are essential along the way. Also, part of the solution is the sort of the introduction of subsidy schemes. What we've heard about, what, for example, India is doing quite successfully, because I mean, the cost of such solutions is still not very competitive compared to the conventional technologies. Second, it's also very important to invest more in R&D for context and geography specific solutions in different places. And also investment in skills and training of specialists is of high importance. Third is one of the main, I think, factors and maybe also obstacles is the awareness gaps. So awareness raising is of really paramount importance in the two regions. And this is something that I think where international donors and donor community can be particularly instrumental in and very helpful. And finally, also as Pamela Decker mentioned, solving existing, but also like looking into the future is very important, right? So like solving existing problems, but also trying to understand, okay, what are the forward-looking solutions that can be identified. So in that regard, of course, as she mentioned, like issues of data availability are very important, and they're very pertinent to the two regions. And so in that regard, I think the anticipatory capacity of the governments on the ground really needs to be strengthened to really meet the challenges and the needs. Thank you.
Okay, Roman, thank you very much for that. So, okay, so now you've heard from our three expert presenters and our two expert panelists. And so we're now kind of towards the second part of this program, which is the question and answers. Again, as I said at the beginning, please click the Q&A button at the top of your screen if you have any questions, and hopefully we can get to them all. A few have come in. I will start by the first is for Mr. Anshuman Lath. Could you explain the ownership the O&M arrangements for the solar pumping systems? And then are the tariffs enough to cover the O&M costs and other costs? And have you come across, or can you say anything about, have there been any difficulties in collecting from the village users? Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is the core thought behind any project, is the O&M, both the ability to do it and also the ability to cover the costs to do it. So one of the reasons why we've gone for group farming of 7 to 10 farmers and then a cluster of such groups in one area is to have trained technical people in those areas. So since the time we've been working, we've always worked in clusters, and that has helped us get local youth from this area trained so that they can take care of 90% of the problems, which are typically small problems. And then because of the scale of operations, we are then able to have good relationships with the suppliers so that in case there is a bigger problem, the warranties take care of such stuff. So, we've had problems earlier with 1 or 2 inverters in off-grid, villages, or nowadays with pumps. A few pumps here and there do cause problems. But I think on the whole, we have over 95% uptime, which is because of local ownership and people to look out. The second part is the cost. Yes, there is more than enough to take care of local O&M, because the farmers themselves are anyways doing most of the piping work themselves. So they are doing so it's only the pump, the filters, and some of the main pipes that need to be looked at by the whole group. And there is enough and more to take care of that. In fact, each of these groups typically have 1 or 2 people who go and also clean the panels regularly, so that there is enough generation. That is something that we've already seen. So the real issue is now to create some kind of a surplus after O&M and after what they can consume, so that some of the money can come back slowly, or it can be put into rotating funds, or it can be used for some amount of these projects to be commercially funded. So that's the line we want to pursue as we go ahead. Does that answer the question?
No, yes, thank you very much, Anshuman. Let me move on. The next question is for Pamli. This comes from someone from a instruments manufacturing company. And he's asking about refrigerators, deep freezers, and air conditioners, and so forth, operating directly on solar PV. What's the impact of that?
Yeah, I think we have other experts on the panel as well, but let me quickly tell you. So in fact, when we are designing the systems, we are trying to accommodate for these loads as well. To the extent, as I said, our work has been focusing on the rural and the peri-urban areas where the air conditioning load is very limited, hardly actually there. It's mostly the deep freezers and the ILRs for immunization and the blood banks, which will account for the cooling loads. And in terms of technology, there is no dearth of technology which can support these loads. It's just about how do you make them resilient enough and robust enough for them to be able to provide 24/7 power, which implies that you also need a large battery backup for these purposes, which might actually increase the size and the capital investment required if you need to capture these kind of loads as well. But in terms of technology, there shouldn't be any problem. There is no problem in terms of supporting these loads.
Okay, thank you, Pamli. And by the way, anybody else can feel free to, add or come in on any of these questions. Sometimes they're addressed to a particular presenter or panelist, but you all kind of have different, but in some ways similar, experiences. So let me go to the next question. This is really. Let's see, this is a question on storage batteries and how, they're comparatively expensive at the moment, at least. And how do you see these being incorporated into some of these solar rural solar solutions? You know, is there a, so I'll stop there. There's a second part of the question, but why don't we'll discuss that one first? Thank you. This could be really to any of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Maybe I'll say a few words and then my distinguished panelists can add in as well. So yes, storage increasingly is cost effective. I think it's right to say that today it might be one of the more expensive elements of a remote microgrid that needs it. Of course, depending on your choice between lithium ion or lead acid, and you know, in some instances, I've seen many grids even work with batteries that aren't brand new, as long as they're well covered by a warranty. That can be one solution to save on cost. But in some of our projects, for example, a solar alone project might be $2 per kilowatt. And when you start adding in storage, it's $2 per kilowatt. And when you start adding in storage and full microgrid capabilities, you can get up to something like $6 a kilowatt. That's of the solar. And then the storage might give you 4 hours duration, for example. And so that does significantly increase your cost. I think what you then, and this might connect to even the prior question, right, is when you have loads like let's say a number of refrigerators that the compressors can all kick on at the same time and create a spike, a lot of these grids are going to benefit from storage that allows you to smooth out your function. The grids that we've worked on are also periodically connected to a relatively fragile grid, and so the storage is going to help protect all of your assets behind the meter, the connection to the broader grid. So it provides a lot of value. I'd say the last point that we've experienced in some facilities that already had power, whether it was through diesel or through the grid, is they want to create their own largely renewable microgrid. The first question is, what are your critical loads? You might have a facility that is really critical for the community, but often there's exterior lighting, there's types of office equipment or elements that aren't actually going to be critical in an emergency. And starting with just the critical loads for your microgrid design really helps you reduce the total cost of your storage and make the overall project really effective.
Okay, thanks, Roy. If anyone else wants to chime in, please do so. Otherwise, I'll kind of get to some more questions. I have a follow-on question to that question on the you know, the effect of the refrigeration and freezers and air conditioning systems. I guess if it's on a DC system, then, you know, I guess that's just separate from the, you know, can't be kind of, you know, integrated with a grid. And any thoughts on that? And then I'll ask a general question for all of you. This comes from me actually playing on this question a little bit. You know, a lot of these remote areas you mentioned are, you know, inaccessible. Or you know, they're in mountainous regions such as Nepal and so on, and there may be, you know, geographical or physical reasons why, you know, the grid hasn't reached these areas, and it's just never going to be cost effective to do so. And I guess in other areas, maybe the grid hasn't reached them, and that's a failure, a separate failure of the you know, the power system and the planners and the investment to get there. So if you could share some thoughts on, you know, when, you know, does it make sense to design systems like, you know, like for example, a DC only system that's going to be standalone, and it might need battery storage, you know, because it's standalone, and, you know, that's a relatively expensive, at least at the moment, but costs are coming down quickly, versus, you know, maybe a grid ready system, or a system that kind of can, you know, as the grid does come, you know, perhaps that can, you know, come in and take over. So any thoughts on any of those issues to any of you?
Yeah, if I may quickly go ahead. So I think this, Roy did touch upon a very interesting and important point, is basically customization, which is linked to, Andrew, your question as well. So at this point of time, as we have seen the whole blanket approach of saying that a primary health center kind of a setting requires a 5 kilowatt peak system and it can survive on that is not really working out. And that's where these all elements about how remote they are, how difficult is it to get there, who will maintain that system in the longer term, because if it's so difficult to get there, it might take actually 3 days for someone to come and fix the system. So I think that whole customization angle is very important, and that's where the whole macro approach is very important, where you actually sit with the policymakers and go through their roadmaps in terms of how are they planning to reach those remote areas. Because if there is a situation where the grid is reaching and you develop a system, there's a huge chance that once the system batteries stop working, people will start moving to the grid. And then there's a whole system lying out there with a huge set of batteries, which is not working. So that's where a lot of integration needs to happen between the community, between the department which is funding this work or the organization funding this work and the policymakers who are developing the electricity roadmaps for the future. So those were my 2 cents on this.
Thank you, Pamela.
I would also maybe add a few words from our experience. Places, for example, like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and also some of the countries in the Southeast Asia, where it was very difficult access to communities which live on different islands and in very remote areas. At least what we see now is that the local governments and the central governments, they still try to provide sort of the conventional solutions, right? They supply those regions and then communities with difficult access. And I mean, in terms of the costs, we can already see that costs is being sort of levelized. It's kind of evening out compared to the standalone, for example, systems or like very local solar energy applications. So we can already say that, yes, well, cost-wise, it becomes more or less the same for the government in some places. I think it's more of the issue of the logistics and also finding the technological solution. This is where I think the main obstacle is at the moment. But increasing costs, I don't think is the case. And giving the actually decreasing costs of this standalone system, I would say that in the long-term perspective, like within the 10 years, this would be even more attractive solutions. But of course, the key question is the maintenance, also the kind of the installation. So these are the key issues, I would say.
Thanks very much, Roman. I have another question. This is actually aimed at Anshuman, but again, others can, chime in afterwards. Basically, when you talked about your 280 community scale projects and, the importance of working with these communities, have there been any kind of common challenges that you've kind of seen repeated over a number of, village after village, and any kind of, that the audience would benefit hearing? Because I mean, if it's applicable commonly in your world, it could very well be applicable elsewhere as well.
Right, thanks. So yes, there are always common challenges, especially because of the terrain. So we go into very, very remote areas, so Pamela would know, and some of these are really inaccessible. So in terms of societal challenges, there is a level of distrust initially as to what you're trying to do, and whether it's going to serve them, and whether they can make it work. So these are all kinds of questions that any community thinks through, and whether it's going to harm them in some way. So questions like, what if you do a microgrid and that, stops the grid from coming tomorrow? That's also a thought, that we encounter in some villages and many times actually. Also with pumps, what happens when one of them don't pay? And these are questions that come up, and these are challenges that have to be overcome. The reason why we kind of succeed many times is the ability to work with local social organizations that are already familiar with the communities or embedded with the communities in some form, with either education, health, women empowerment, agriculture, or some other kind of activity that they've been doing in that cluster of villages, even if it's not every village in that area. So once you have similar villages that have, this kind of hostility is removed, then you're able to kind of overcome these challenges. So this distrust that we initially find, the second part of that is also removed because of exposure visits. So we kind of ensure that every village that we want to work in, a group of 4 or 5, people, including women, are able to see a similar project in some other location. And only when they come back and have a village meeting and describe what they've seen and then discuss the pros and cons, and then they come back saying that, oh, we don't think this will work in our village, we don't want you to come. Or they can come back saying, yeah, we're really excited, we can find the land, we can find the operator, we can make the committee, we are willing to shell the initial contribution. And so we are happy to be led by them for the second part.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Anshuman. I don't know if anyone else wants to add some experience. Otherwise, I can move on to other questions.
Yeah, Andy, I might just add a little bit here. This is a great question.
Sure.
And Anshuman, I think you hit it right on. I think, a remote community has distrust for many types of new solutions, or anything that looks and feels like a government initiative, I think starts off on the back foot. The other big thing from a technical perspective that I've really experienced is a problem around utilization, right? So a grid that goes in a place that has no experience with electricity, there aren't immediately the sort of the folks saying, yep, I'm going to put in my water pumping system and my grain mill, and we're going to start using it, regularly. There's sort of a hesitation to immediately start investing into a new system. And that means that there could be years at the start where it is, if you have power, but you're not utilizing it on a daily basis. On the flip side, what we see in some places that have experience with power, unfortunately, is when you need it most, which is often when that remote community is cut off. There's a flood, there's a landslide, that remote community is cut off, is everyone will go to the place that has power, and they're trying to plug in their cell phones or their devices and just be connected. And so you have oversubscription essentially to a limited power source, and the ability to predict and have a sort of happy medium between those two potential situations is one that we've often struggled with in this sector.
Okay, now thank you, Roy. Unless anyone else have something to say on that, otherwise I'll move on. Okay, the next question. This is again for you, Roy. It's about when you mentioned your kind of work after some hurricanes in the Caribbean, and was this kind of post-emergency temporary power that was some kind of kit or modular solution until the grid was fixed, or was this more of kind of a permanent, longer solution post the disaster?
Yeah, good question. And this was, with all of our local partners, something we were really sensitive about. There's typically a time period of just immediate response and recovery of, find people who are isolated. Health and human life protection is the number one priority. There are a number of good solar lighting kits and abilities to charge a radio or a cell phone. Those are not the systems I was referencing that we really focused on. We came in more in the community recovery phase. And so that was months after the disaster, when they were rebuilding, assessing sort of where was some of the greatest damage. And unfortunately in Puerto Rico, because the grid was weak before the storm, this was a long duration power outage, months for the average customer. Some customers didn't get power back for 7 months, and it wasn't this wasn't even a predictable outage. They were told frequently by the government that power will be back on shortly. And so these are systems that are designed for permanent installation, mostly on rooftops, and for long duration power for decades to come.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Roy. My next question, this is for Dr. Baral. It's a question on the CO2 savings that you mentioned. Is that over the lifetime of the ORC facility? And also on that is to the extent how many of pilots of this technology have occurred so far in Nepal, and what are the main challenges for scale up?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Uh, According to the life cycle of the plant, it is based on 20 years of life period of this ORC cycle. In this life, because I have estimate the size of the plant is just 3.5 kilowatt. From this 3.5 kilowatt, the uh, carbon dioxide saving is around just 22 tons in 20 years. And this is, if we increase the size, the more will be the saving. And another question is the pilot size. Till now, there is not such pilot plant in Nepal, but uh, I have seen one of the pilot project in Letheso, which is in South Africa, South Saharan Africa. So they estimate around 3 kilowatt pilot project of this ORC, and but small scale, in small scale around 1 or 2 kilowatt, there has not much research or not much manufacturing company to establish all these components and then established in the rural part or some other parts. So in Nepal also, it's just the research area where is the appropriate location we can install this type of ORC plant. So this is just a study. So there haven't any pilot project based. So it is the, I think it is the main challenging part for the next years to come.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Burrell. Next question is for Roman. You mentioned that, some of the markets you work in are not ready for, significant scale up of some of these technologies, and that the government has been the main player. And, you talked about the importance of the private sector becoming involved. And so, what do you see that the private sector is not involved because the government's the main player, or is the government the main player because the private sector is not involved? It's kind of a chicken or egg question, I guess. But if you could share some thoughts on that, because you've worked in some, particularly Central West Asia has a lot of previously and even current centrally history of some kind of centrally planned economies from the past, and and how that's evolving now. But anyway, over to you.
Thank you very much for this excellent question. Indeed, it's an issue that requires really a lot of time to respond to. But of course, I will try to summarize some of the sort of the essential things related to it. So I must say that, well, places like Central Asia, especially as you, Andrew, rightly said, has these traditions of the strong role of the state and the planned economy. And of course, things have in many ways changed with some of the market elements in place in the region. But at the same time, I would say that both Central Asia and Southeast Asia, two regions that are somewhat lagging behind compared to other peers in the world, and not only in terms of the sort of solar power, non-grid sort of solutions, more in terms of the renewable energy in general. And if you look at the market size, for example, when it comes to the investment in renewable energy, so Central Asia and Southeast Asia haven't really attracted much. If you look at the numbers, so the numbers pretty much limited, and so they were very much the same as they were back in 2010. So you don't really see any dramatic trends and increases, except for some of the kind of individual success stories, like for example Vietnam, which really managed to attract a lot of investment in renewables in 2018, or like for example Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan now trying to develop some of the solar energy. But the main thing is that the markets are very much focused on solar energy as the source of electricity so far. And I think because of that, there has been very limited focus, and also, as I mentioned, the awareness of other solutions that are available. has not really been very much on the agenda, both in terms of the government focus, but also in terms of the international donor involvement and so on. I think the key issue here is that probably, as it was seen by the governments, is that first it's important to really try to invest and kind of spread the application of renewable energy as a source of electricity, first of all, and then move towards some other application. I think both markets are pretty much at this stage. And when I said about the private market, I think that what the government can really do is to elaborate a number of very important measures, such as the subsidy schemes, such as the financial risk management instruments, for example, for investors that try to invest in sort of the pilot phases, because since the market there is not quite developed yet, I think it's important that the government, at least at this stage, should support the players, and this can be a very important move that can potentially attract big players from already quite advanced markets, for example, in places like India and throughout the world.
Okay, interesting. Thanks very much. The next question is, I guess, for any panelist that has worked on remote installation of solar PV panels. Generally, the batteries that have been installed last or for how many years?
Okay, so our first microgrid was set up in 2012. We inaugurated it in July. And 2019 March, we changed the battery. So that was like 6.5 years. Our next one was 2014 March, and a few in that year. They have yet to come up for a replacement. Similarly, the primary health centers, we have done 11 in 2015, early 2015. The batteries are working fine till now. So we can easily say that we are seeing 5 years plus, going up to 6.5 years in these. And these are lead acid, valve regulated, maintenance-free lead acid batteries that we're talking about. So we have to be careful about the inverter and the battery management system. Try and ensure that you don't exceed C/5 and C/10, extraction of current rates, and these cycles have been pretty much encouraging in our experience.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, next question that came in, really not aimed at any particular panelist. How do you ensure community compliance on the payment for the solar facility?
So these are things that, sorry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Pamli, why don't you start in, followed by Anshuman. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so basically, from our experience, what we have seen is one critical element is to involve the community from the very beginning. If the system is installed and then they are given the onus of taking care of it without involving them in the initial discussions to design the system, that definitely is a kind of a recipe for some future issues. But I think Anshuman would be the right person to also talk about how to carry this on, discussions on with the community, as he has been referring to. Anshuman, over to you.
Yes, so whatever you do, it's never perfect. So that is the second part to it. So we have seen that there are challenges, but when people realize that they can't do without it, so I can give you two anecdotal evidences. Not only payment, which are regular payments. In one village in Jharkhand, very remote village, one of the boys was throwing stones at the trees and birds, and one of the stones broke a panel. And this panel was then, say $100. So the village energy committee asked us, what should we do? And we said, we can replace it if you pay this. So the village then put a fine on the boy's family, and they agreed to pay it in 4 installments, and then it was changed. In another case, some panels were stolen, 2 panels from one village. And when they realized that there was nothing coming in for free, they managed to pay for it and get those 2 panels. So that's $200. So we've seen that people, when they realize the importance and they know that without money, it's not going to work, they have come forward and made sure that they pay. So it's a question of, as Pamli said, involving them from the beginning, but then there will be challenges, and some people, in the village themselves try and overcome those challenges rather than you doing it from outside.
Yeah, in my experience, I completely agree with that. I think it's easy to focus on the choice of technology, whether it's mobile payment, cash, or pay as you go. But I think it all starts with community engagement. Some of the best examples we've seen have, the same person who is handling maintenance and panel cleaning, right, is constantly talking to people about here's how the system is working. It's checking in on making sure everyone's connections are working just fine, and that is sort of a constant touch point within the community is one of the best predictors of payment compliance.
Thanks very much. Anyone else want to add? Otherwise, we can move on. I think we have, I'm not sure the exact time left, but 5 minutes or perhaps a little more, something around that line. If not, I'll add the next another question, which again along the line of how to finance such projects, this payment. Some of these applications require subsidies. It's quite easy, as we found at ADB, to do a grant-funded pilot. And you build whatever it is you're building and so on, but how to move it to financial sustainability, how to make it pay for itself. Anshuman, you mentioned how when the village realized that the benefits of this system, but that it wasn't free and they had to figure out how to make it work, they kind of did so. So does anybody have any thoughts to share on just kind of that concept of transitioning some of these applications from kind of grant funded to something a little more sustainable?
Andrew. Yeah.
Yes, see, Suresh, please
Yeah.
proceed.
The one way to make a sustainable development is what type of technology is there? Is it a new technology such as solar work? Might be very high, but in case of solar PV or other system of uh, technology which has already been matured, this type of subsidy, this type of technology have less subsidy as compared to the one. So in my case, if there is solar ORC, then the government should initially invest a lot of money in this technology, and later, if the technology is mature, then the rate should be very less. So this is my version in case of subsidy financial sustainable way.
Thank you, Suresh. Anyone else want to add anything there?
Yeah, if I may quickly add, so there's one thing which we have noticed that particularly in the social loads, we haven't seen the RESCO model yet. And I think there's something that needs to be explored further, that if you are highly reliant on a diesel generator set and relying on diesel for your regular kind of 3 to 8 hours a day, I think the economics needs to be worked out and might work out in favor of renewable energy, which might actually help in looking at RESCO as a model. Definitely, I mean, the energy enterprise needs to bear the initial cost, but if there's a kind of you can see into the future when you are breaking even, that might be something that needs to be tried out. We really haven't seen any models that work right now, apart from a few in Nepal, actually, but that's something definitely needs to be explored a bit more.
Okay. Thank you. If no one has anything else to add to that, I think we don't have much time left. So I kind of want to end with a little bit of thought. Pamli, your presentation, you talked about, obviously technology is a key part of these solutions. Financing is another, capacity, and is a third, and and then policy, and they're all and integrated. They all kind of fit together. I mean, without the proper policies, you kind of don't have some of the financing available and so on. And without the capacity, you won't attract financing, or the what you're trying to accomplish isn't sustainable. Any thoughts on, now that technology itself is becoming cheaper, becoming a little more proven, a little more well known, and with some of your applications, what amongst these, what is there some government or policies or that really could help push it forward, or is it really more for on the financing side, and if so, from development institutions or others? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just take a quick minute. I'm pretty sure everyone else on this panel will have their opinions, but expert opinions. So I think this is the right time for the government to work along with development institutions and the organizations which are actually implementing these solutions on the ground. Because the finance which is being made available needs to speak to the needs of the people on the ground. And subsidies and policies, subsidies have been discussed for a long time. But in terms of rolling out the new programs which are being discussed right now, be it in terms of financing healthcare post-COVID, or in terms of financing educational institutions to take care of relief centers, for example, building relief centers during floods, I think all of this needs to talk to each other. It's the right time for the health ministry to talk to the energy ministry, to talk to the financing organizations and development institutions who are actually funding this work, and then at the same time get the inputs from grassroots organizations. Organizations like, for example, Anshuman, who is actually working with the grassroots to get the real situation from the ground in terms of energy demand, future demand, existing demand. So I'll stop there and hand it over to the other experts on the panel.
Thank you, Pamli.
I can just say very briefly two points. I support what Camila said, and I would just add that I would still get back to the idea of awareness raising about all the kind of benefits, and the kind of the success stories. So really zooming in success stories and then trying to kind of replicate them, and also to build awareness in different kinds of way. In fact, the awareness gaps are really substantial. Second, I think it's also important when we talk about capacity building, not only in the private sector, but also capacity building on the part of the government institutions, starting from the ministerial level, where kind of to manage this particular process require new skills, new knowledge. And so you really need to invest into your sort of human resources at the government level in order to kind of to be able to more efficiently and effectively coordinate and manage all these transactions.
Yeah, very much agreed with my fellow panelists on this. There's a couple points. I think we must understand that we're in a very different world today because of COVID-19. And these remote communities in some areas have been spared, but are really vulnerable if they don't have direct access to modern healthcare. And so being able to support them and actually make them increasingly self-sufficient, including on energy, I think will be critical. And because of that, I think that governments and others responding to also the increased awareness that ambient air pollution is one of the unfortunate predictors of negative health outcomes due to the coronavirus. I think there will be an urgency to say, how can we quickly support rapid ramp up of remote clean energy? And the one technique that we've seen really have some success in some regions is a limited guarantee, right? So often the financiers are charging quite high interest rates because of unfamiliarity with the technology or unawareness of how the borrowers are often improved because of these systems. And so a limited guarantee by governments and other major donors can really be catalytic.
Okay, thanks, Roy. Anyone else have anything to say on that? Okay, I'm not exactly sure how much time we have left, so I just heard a few interesting, points, and the importance of awareness and like this concept of a limited guarantee, because as a staff of the Asian Development Bank, that's a role we can play in both of those. And actually this very forum is kind of designed for the awareness. But do any of you have any thoughts on, like case studies, or, what are better ways to make aware, I guess, not just the success stories, but the kind of lessons learned from some of the not so success stories? Any quick thoughts on that?
From a practitioner perspective, I guess one of the issues we faced is that the institutions like the ADB seem too far off. Personally, I would have interacted with the ADB last 2-3 years, also been to Manila and stuff. But I think we've really not been able to engage enough for the organizations or the institutions to come and really see some of the, as you said, the lessons learned. And therefore it seems that there are too many intermediaries before you really reach some kind of a possibility. Like, for example, working through the government, for example, or other places, there could be some way to bypass some of the intermediaries, so that there is direct learning and direct interaction, and that could help on both sides. Is one small thought that I had.
Thank you very much, Anshuman. Good to hear. Anybody else have any quick thoughts on that? I think we're already over the time limit, so I'll have to conclude it after that. But any other quick thoughts? That's it. Okay. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm happy to see you virtually. I wish we could meet in person instead, but perhaps next year. So thank you for all your time on this, and I guess this will conclude the session. So you remember, I just want to remind everyone that one of the aims of the whole Asia Clean Energy Forum is the connectivity, and I know that can't happen in person this year, but there's all the ways to get in touch with each other, and you can still reach out to these experts if you have further questions. I couldn't get to all of them, so please feel free to do so. And I think with that, I'll conclude and wish you all the best rest of the week. Thanks very much, and good night or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.